Hello, everyone, and welcome to Unfound Now. It's been a while, as many of you know. I've been going through some things, and I've taken some time off from the podcast that comes out every Friday. But one of the goals that I made back in December when this all started going on is need to keep up on at least some of the other things that I do, and Unfound Now is one of those items. So here we are at the end of January of 2025, and it's been a couple months since one of these episodes came out, but I'm going to try to stick to this monthly series as best I can here in this year, and I'm surely believing that a month from now I will be in a better physical and mental shape than I am right now. As the title suggests, we're going to take a look at the November 2024 disappearance of Robert Williams. He's an 80-year-old who went missing from Arlington, Virginia, and I think what's important to understand about this disappearance is that he originally lived there and then he had moved to the state of Georgia, and he went missing while on a trip back in Arlington, Virginia. So very important. He was not a resident of Arlington, Virginia when he went missing back in November. We're going to take a look at this, and that's what we do here at Unfound. Now we take a look at recent disappearances. So going way back to the summer of 2020, I guess the summer of COVID, I started this monthly series and have not missed too many months. But in all of those episodes, I took a look at very recent disappearances. What qualifies as recent within a few months of the airing date. So here we are at the end of January. Robert went missing back in late November. Whereas if you look at a disappearance that I did last summer, let's say one that came out, episode that came out at the end of July, that disappearance probably happened in April, May, or early June of 2024, something like that. That's what we do. In contrast to the podcast that comes out every Friday, in which we take a look at what I would call old disappearances. These are disappearances that are over a year old, and with the average age of a disappearance on the podcast being like 22, 23 years old, if you can believe it. It's very sad. It's amazing and sad at the same time. So I try to cover like both extremes, the older disappearances with the podcast and the newer disappearances with this series. So here we are. The goals since the beginning over 4 years ago for this series is education, insight, and publicity. And with each one of these episodes, I bring some points of learning, things that we can take away from these disappearances. All these disappearances are horrible, but we have to do what we can to learn about them, to see if they can be solved. How can we prevent these kinds of disappearances happening in the future? And of course, for people out there who have had disappearances happen in their lives that are still unsolved, or disappearances that are going to happen, try to put information in people's hands out there that they can use should this already have happened to them or may happen to them somewhere in the future. The learning points, the three learning points for Robert's disappearance are age matters, number one. Number two, the last driver. And number three, surprises and searches. So now I'm going to go to the map. I'm going to read an article while you can see the map. Robert was seen at a convenience store seemingly not long before he went missing. I'm going to point out where that location is. I'm going to point out where his vehicle was eventually found. We're going to take a look at the surrounding area and the upcoming map, while I also read an article that was written back at that time. And you should know there are no recent articles. No articles about his disappearance have been written, for example, here in January of 2025. So let's go to the map. And then I will, after that, take a look at these 3 learning points. Okay, let's take a look at this map for the disappearance of Robert Williams. And I'm going to read an article written about his disappearance back when he went missing, just to see what it has to say. It points out a couple different locations that I'm going to go over in the map. You can see there on the screen right now. And you should know that this article was written well back beginning of December, somewhere in there. And there have been no articles written since. So if there is any new information, it's not regarding his disappearance. It is not out on the internet. Of course, when I do these Unfound Nows, I always try to make sure that the person hasn't been found yet. Although I did do one a few months ago where the person hadn't been found. I started creating the video, and the person was found in the meantime, and I think I still published it. So that's how it works out sometimes. So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit so you can see there up at the top of the screen, up at the top of the map. That is where he was last seen at a convenience store. And then down there at the bottom of the map, of the bottom of the screen, that red dot, that is approximately where his vehicle was eventually found. And I will zoom in on that in a moment. But right now I'm going to read this article. It's from Arlington, Virginia. The search for 80-year-old Robert Pat Williams continues with family and friends and police in Arlington and Fairfax County, intensifying efforts to locate the critically missing man. On Thursday, police released a new image of the man that shows the clothes he was last seen wearing. Williams, who vanished on November 25th, was last seen at a store on the 2200 block of North Buchanan Street in Arlington, wearing a camouflage jacket, and that picture is out there. His Toyota Tacoma pickup truck was discovered a week later on Fairfax Drive near North Jefferson Street, but his whereabouts remain unknown. Williams, a former Arlington resident who moved to Georgia, had returned to the area to visit a friend. His grandson, Nick Williams, said the family became alarmed when he failed to return home for Thanksgiving. We thought he was headed back to Georgia. When we didn't see him show up for Thanksgiving, we knew something was wrong. He's very special to a lot of us. Fairfax County Police confirmed at the time there's no indications of foul play. However, the uncertainty surrounding his disappearance has left his family deeply worried. Search efforts have included canine units, drones, ground searches of the surrounding areas familiar to Williams, including the Custis Trust Trailhead, and Bon Air Park. Friends and neighbors have also joined the search, scouting nearby woods and trails where Williams was known to walk during his time in the area. One neighbor near the location where his truck was found noted that it had been parked there for days with its window left open during a rainstorm, I guess, a detail she found unusual. Local resident Anthony Marlis said, "This is completely out of character if you ask me. I walked around in the woods a little bit up and down just to make sense. Why would he park here?" Williams' family shared he had been dealing with heart issues in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. They also suspect his occasional paranoia could have influenced his decisions. As the search continues, police urge anyone with information about Robert Williams' whereabouts to come forward. He is described as 5'9", approximately 170 pounds, with gray hair and brown eyes. If you see him or have any information, please contact the Fairfax County Department immediately. It's at 703-691-2131. All right, regarding this map, like I just said, up here, 2200 North Buchanan Street is where he was last seen on video at the convenience store. How that they found that video, I don't know. Maybe they checked his credit cards or something, but it's not in the article. I couldn't find that information anywhere. Here's what I know. They didn't go out there and start going from store to store, building to building, camera to camera. They surely did not do that. So we now go down. You can see it's about a 6-minute drive 2.2 miles from there to where his vehicle was found, right down here. And I guess maybe what might catch my attention is that this road ends. It's kind of a dead end. This road comes right to the highway, and you can't cross here at the highway. So let's say that he parked his vehicle and got out of it. He could not have crossed over here. Now, there might be a trail down here to the west, down Fairfax or something like that. But if he was coming down North Jefferson Street, there's nowhere else to go. He had to make a left or right on Fairfax Drive. Obviously, he didn't do that, or whoever parked his car there, his truck there, did not do that because it was found right here in this area. So what I'm also saying in my insight into this is that this then would be a fairly easy compared to a lot of other disappearances that we've featured on the podcast. Easier area to search than normal. That you just realize there's nowhere to go, at least south. And this is all pretty populated, this area. So you're kind of limited to this area just south of Fairfax, I guess between Fairfax and the highway. Really. And if you do a street view, there are woods there. I can understand that you would need multiple people to search in this area. Not easy to do this, but easier than most circumstances, like I said, that we usually run into when we start talking about missing people and looking for them. But we know maybe with the circumstances like Bowman, people can go missing in areas where there aren't a lot of places to hide when we start looking at trees, bushes, and things like that. Which is, this area kind of looks like a similar area to where Bowman went missing in LA a few years ago. What also catches my attention is that if you were zooming back out, if you were at this convenience store and really wanted to go this direction, if he was having paranoia issue, mental health issue, maybe some sort of psychological issue. Of course, he was 80 years old. How was his memory and keeping track of things? These are big questions that I'm going to get into a little more in a moment here once I'm done with the map. I start wondering, was he driving south here and he thought he was on one of these other streets and was thinking, well, I'm going to be able to maybe cross over here, whatever road this is called. Maybe I'll be able to cross over the highway, here at the North George Mason Drive. Did he think he was on one of these other streets, maybe this North Harrison Street right here that goes kind of north and south? Did he think he was on one of those streets going north and south that were going to would take him past the highway, over the highway, under the highway? And instead, he was over here on Jefferson and then was confused. And, of course, he got blocked by the highway and was unclear what to do. And that just created a cascade of problems for him. It's something I'm open to. I don't know. I don't know this area at all. I'm not sure where he was intending to go. Was this the day that he was planning to drive back to Georgia? I don't know if that's known anywhere. But this is something that comes to mind, given that his vehicle is found right here in an area that seems very boxed in to me, especially considering that he was north of this area and then his vehicle ended up, in that general location. I could start to believe that he thought he was on a different road when really he was on this one that gets stopped by the highway. So that is the map. Just to zoom out here, I see there's a river way over here to the east, but it's really not catching my attention for this disappearance at all. Certainly somebody else could have not put his car there, could have gotten carjacked, and I'll get into that a little bit more in the insights section at the end. So that's the map. Robert was up here. convenience store, and at some point his vehicle ended up down here, and it was there for a few days before it was discovered. All right, let's go. Let me now talk about the learning points for this episode of Unfound Now. All right, before I get into those learning points, I want to remind all of you, please give this video a thumbs up. If you are just finding the Unfound YouTube channel here, please subscribe. Please share it with anybody else that you think might enjoy all of the content. I mean, you start going through, we have, even though Unfound is a podcast, even I am amazed how many videos we have. And Unfound is one of the rare podcasts that does both audio and video. Very, very rare out there. Why that is, I don't know. But very prominent podcast that comes out every Friday. And then we have these videos, map videos, other things, the live show that I do that are right here on this channel. So please make sure you check all of that out and share it with others. If you'd like to contribute to what we do here, patreon.com/Unfound Podcast and paypal.me/Unfound Podcast. And you can also be a member of this channel by hitting the join button below. All right, let's take a look at those 3 learning points, starting with the first one. Age matters. When we're looking at disappearances, as you've heard me say many, or if maybe not, if you're someone new, one of my main points over the last 8 years that I've learned is that disappearances are about people, not about circumstances. Looking at the person, what's going on in that person's life. Do they have any addictions, mental health, any education, relationship status, all of that. That's going to probably tell you more about how that person could go missing and what happened than the actual circumstances. Certainly the circumstances are important. And that's going to help solve the disappearance. But most of the time, if you tell me all about a missing person, I don't even need to know the circumstances. I can pretty well predict how that person went missing. That's how good I've gotten at this. Well, age is certainly one of those components, and in fact, it's a huge component. And it especially becomes important when we start talking about older people. And what do I mean by older? Good question. I mean, a 17-year-old thinks I'm old at 54, and yeah, sometimes I feel like I'm old. But when we get to the point, when we get into the age of Robert Williams, he being the topic of this video, and then some other missing people that we've featured on the podcast, like Milda McQuillan, David Hardy Jr., Jack Hemby Jr., and there's been some other older people who have gone missing, and to my knowledge, all of these, what we would call older people, and I'm going to define that here in a moment, are still missing. What I mean about older people is we have to remember that just about any human can have an addiction. Any human can have mental health issues, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. And just about anybody can have that as a human. But when you start talking about older people, the definition that I use is when dementia, memory issues start to become more likely. Now, I realize there's early onset dementia. It's very sad. People in their 50s can start getting Alzheimer's, but that's very, very rare. Really, we're talking about people usually into their late 60s, into their 70s, where this could become an issue. Now, of course, my father's 88 years old. He doesn't have any of those issues. But a lot of people, if they even live to be 88, do. And this is something we have to look at when we start talking about older people, late 60s, 70 years old, 80 years old, that we would never think about of course, for younger people. And that's what makes looking at older people of that age, you have to look at it just a little bit different. You have to add that component into your analysis. Just like, on the other hand, if you start looking at teenagers, you have to start looking at teenagers, of course, are much more likely to run, what we would say, quote unquote, run away than a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old. Even then, really have to look at the person specifically. But so with each age group, there's a little bit of different analysis that has to be done. But certainly, we start looking at people Robert's age, we really have to start looking at what was that person's, and I don't mean mental health status, I actually mean mind status at that point. Now, coincidentally, regarding Robert and those people that I just mentioned, Milda, David, Jack, coincidentally or not, all of them are connected to abandoned vehicles as well. It's interesting to me. That caught my attention as I was putting together this episode. We have to remember some other things. The older you get, the odds of you incurring foul play diminish. Absolutely, absolutely diminish. The older you get, the less likely you're going to be the victim of foul play. Why? Well, older people tend to spend more time at home. They tend to spend more time around family. Of course, many of them have moved into complexes or buildings where there are people around their same age. They're not isolated. Whereas you start talking about 20-year-olds, they start going out to clubs. They're staying out till 3 a.m. What's the saying? Nothing good ever happens after 1 a.m. And then that brings foul play much more into the picture. So we have to keep that in mind. I'm not saying that 80-year-olds can't be murdered or carjacked or whatever. The odds of that greatly, greatly diminish. And we also have to remember, when we start talking about 80-year-olds in contrast to 20-year-olds, there are way more 20-year-olds out there than there are 80-year-olds. You have to remember the average age, at least here in the United States, the average man only lives to be 72 years old, and the average woman only lives to be 78 years old. So if you're getting to 80, consider yourself lucky. And of course, my dad's 88. He is very, very fortunate. Now, one more point about older people, and this is interesting because this is something, although we didn't talk about this specifically, I was just talking to my primary care provider, my doctor, recently about something, and he made the point that so many physical and mental diseases, the layman thinks that they kind of ramp up over time, like it's a gradual issue. And his insight is it's more like the straw that broke the camel's back. That, yeah, there are things that people are covering up physically or mentally that are ramping up, but really when we look at it from the outside, we're looking at John Smith and he seems fine one day and then he's not fine the next. That can happen. It doesn't necessarily have to be the person degenerates physically or mentally over time. It could certainly be one day is fine, the next day is not. That is not that unusual. Like I said, I talked to my doctor about totally something different when that topic popped up. So when we look at Robert, there's nothing out there about him regarding was he having any memory issues, like that, forgetting where he was, getting lost, anything like that. I couldn't find anything. We have to keep in mind he did drive from Georgia to Virginia. Seemingly, I guess he got there, and I didn't read anything that any problems that he got lost or anything. So that probably lowers the chance of the idea that he had he got lost and abandoned his vehicle, not knowing what he was doing. But on the other hand, it very well could be something that this just popped up out of nowhere. It might have been something under the surface that he was able to control. He knew something was going on, and then he couldn't control it anymore. It's very, very possible. And this is why age matters. When you look at disappearances, age is absolutely something that is a factor. The reasons that a 20-year-old goes missing are much different than the reasons that an 80-year-old goes missing. You never think about a 20-year-old losing his or her memory, forgetting where unless, of course, drugs are involved, but just naturally, some sort of mental issue, brain issue, just forgetting where they are, anything. Of course, for a 20-year-old, that is so, so rare. And for an 80-year-old, we know it's much, much more common. And none of us wants to get to, I think nobody wants that. We understand there are going to be physical issues as we get older. I think it's the mental issues that I think that really scare all of us, I think, in getting older. On the other hand, 20-year-olds much more likely to be involved in foul play, be victims of foul play than 80-year-olds. It's very important when we look at disappearances like Robert's. Moving on. Number 2, the last driver. Between these disappearances that have been featured here on Unfound now, and then on the podcast, and of course we got 360 disappearances now, many of those disappearances have involved abandoned vehicles. In contrast, very few disappearances has Unfound covered where the person in the car went missing. I know that's gotten a lot of attention due to all of the diving teams that have popped up on YouTube over the last 5 years, 7 years, something like that. But disappearances where person and car go missing at the same time and they remain missing, very rare. Whereas disappearances involving just people missing but their cars are found abandoned somewhere, very common. It's a lot like that. Whether that means the vehicle is found out in the middle of nowhere, or whether it's found in a Walmart parking lot, whether it's found in the parking garage in some city, or in a driveway somewhere, very, very common. So when you think about Robert's disappearance, no matter his age or not, people go missing, their cars found in unusual areas, it's fairly common. Now, my perception, and you should know, we're working on a database here at Unfound right now where we're going to be able to flesh this out a little bit more and analyze it a little bit better. But what are the odds that, we run into a disappearance like this where the car's abandoned? What are the odds that the person who's missing left it there, in contrast to somebody else left it there kind of staging the car? We're still working on that. And my perception, this is not fact, my perception is most of these cars are left by the missing people themselves. However, in each one of these situations, at this point, that missing person must be examined. Does he or she seem like the person that would abandon the car? What was going on? The facts should be analyzed for items that stick out. So I guess what I'm saying is, you run across a disappearance like this, got to look at the person, he or she, what was going on with her in his or her life. Does it seem then that this person would leave his or her car somewhere and abandon it? And then you start looking, well, are there any facts to show that somebody else left it there? Maybe a good example would be like Jennifer Kessy. Of course, there's a fact. We know she didn't leave her car where it was found. Why? Because there's a video of some other person walking away from her car. And certainly there are disappearances that Unfound is covered where that's the same way. But we have a lot of disappearances where the car was found and there are no facts to point us in any direction at all. Now, having said that, it's kind of a mixed bag for Unfound's disappearances that have been solved. So we know what happened. We know why the disappearances occurred. For example, Tyler North, he was murdered. His vehicle was dumped by the two people who murdered him. Robbie Hurt, who was found not far from his truck, it's obvious his truck was not dumped. He left it where it was found, and he was in the process, I think, of overdosing, and he stumbled off and died in a snowstorm. Zoe Campos, She went missing with her car, and then her car was found a few days later in an apartment complex. It was dumped by Carlos Rodriguez, who killed her. And then Dennis Lushball, it's another situation where the car was not dumped. He once again was addict, having issues, and his vehicle was found, and then eventually, just within the last couple years, he was found not too far from when the vehicle was found, and it's pretty clear that he left the vehicle where it was. So we got it dumped, we got it not dumped. We got it dumped, we got it not dumped. So 50-50, I guess is what I'm saying. Missing people left their cars where they were found in a couple of these cases. Missing people did not leave their cars where they're found in a couple cases. So is it possible that somebody other than Robert left his truck where it was found? Absolutely. He could have gotten carjacked. I don't think there are any facts that I've heard to support that. But yeah, if you drive a car and you're out there in the public, yeah, there's a possibility that you're going to get carjacked. You have to understand, though, just the odds of anybody getting carjacked is very, very, very low, despite all the videos and the news coverage and everything else. You can go out there, drive. It's like plane crashes. You know, there are people who are irrationally afraid of flying in planes because they're afraid they're going to crash. Flying by plane is the safest way to travel of all. Ships, trains, subways, cars, planes are the safest. Except that it's the media that gives us a distorted view of all of this. Same way with carjacking. On the other hand, hard to understand why a carjacker would leave Robert's truck where it was found, especially to be found so easily. Right there, parked out. Wasn't dumped. It wasn't pushed into a river somewhere. Nobody took it to a junkyard. It's just sitting there right there on the street for anybody to see, even with the license plate. If you think if somebody's going to dump a car, if they don't want it to be found for a while, what do? You take the license plate off of it. Or you go steal somebody else's license plate, put it on that vehicle, and that can really cover everything up. That wasn't done. These are all things that you have to keep in mind. But perception is the missing people usually are the ones who have left their cars behind. Like I said, you really got to take a look at it. But I think eventually when we do the analysis here in Unfound, we're going to find that's going to be true. So keep that in mind also regarding Robert's disappearance. And then third, surprises and searches. These two topics, surprises and searches, rarely go together. And what I mean by that is the stats say not to expect if Robert is deceased, and I, of course, hope that he is alive. But if he is not alive, the stats say not to expect to find Robert 15 miles away. For the most part, except with the exception of Tom Brown, and the jury's still out on that, his death. Pretty much, you find out where a person was last seen, a person where the car was last found or parked or whatever else. That missing person is going to be very, very close to that. And what I mean by very, very close, within a mile. Of course, like I said, Dennis Schlossbaugh found very close to his car. Robbie Hurt found very close to his truck. In contrast, Tyler North was not found near his truck. Why? Because it was dumped. Zoe Campos was not found close to her car because her car was dumped. Nowhere near to where she ended up being buried. So we have to keep that in mind. But for the most part, I forget what the disappearance was where I went into the math of this, that when you find a missing person's car, and there are really no reasons to think there is foul play, missing person is usually going to be found nearby. Why? Well, it depends what was going on. Depends what was going on in that person's life. If the person was suicidal and they're eager to commit suicide, well, walking a ways and thinking about suicide can get to be a chore. you've already decided you're going to kill yourself. Why walk 10 miles away from your car? Hard to understand. Unless you're trying to cover up your suicide and you want it to, you want your death to be a mystery. And maybe some people do that. I don't know how common that is. What I'm saying is the odds say if Robert is deceased, he's probably in the immediate area within a mile of where his truck was found, despite all the searches that were done. Searches make mistakes. So what I mean by surprises and searches, I'm going to be surprised if Robert's remains are found 10 miles away. That would be a surprise. What usually goes on with searches, when they are successful, these missing people are found deceased not too far away. And we also have to consider he's 80 years old. If he parked his truck there, how far could he have walked? And maybe I did read somewhere he might have even had a heart condition or something. This even lends more of an idea to the idea, strength to the idea that he is in that immediate area despite the searches that were done. Of course, I just looked at the map. Not a lot of places he could be, but as I also stated in the map section of this episode today, we talk about Bowman. If there was ever a place you wouldn't think a person could go missing and kind of be right there in plain sight, it would be Santa Monica, California. Yet that's what happened with Bowman. Took a little while. Took a year and a half for him to be found, but he was right out there. He wasn't in the bushes. He wasn't buried. He wasn't in a sewer. He wasn't in somebody's attic. He was outside in this courtyard. Granted, the building was abandoned and everything, but he was out there and not hidden. So we might have to be open to that regarding Robert's disappearance. Once again, if we are inclined to think that he is no longer with us. I have here some list of Robbie Hurt. I've already mentioned him. Crystal Morrison, Jay Lushball, Noah Davis. The overall stats on this part of disappearances is very, very clear, despite searches often failing. Most of the time, missing people are found very close to where they were last seen. So, and that's what I mean, not a lot of surprises. I realize that people expect surprises and everything. It's fairly clear. And we shouldn't be surprised when so many missing people are found very close to where they were last seen or where there were cars are parked. Instances like that. So what is my insight regarding Robert Williams's disappearance? Well, as is usually the situation with these unfound nows, I don't have any more information than any of you do. I have to kind of read between the lines, use my experience, try to look at all of Unfound's disappearances and apply it to Robert's disappearance, knowing there's going to be quite a bit of wiggle room. There isn't anything out there about Robert as a person. Did he have a history of mental health issues? Was he showing any signs of Alzheimer's or dementia? And I realize those are the same. They're different. I'm not a doctor. Can anybody tell me how far could he have really walked? There's no information on that. At the store, what did he buy? This might be important for us to know. He was at this convenience store. Does anybody know what he bought? I'm guessing we know because I'm guessing they found out that he was at this convenience store by accessing his financial records, his credit cards, ATM card, and were able to see the receipt and, then look at the video. What did he buy? This also might help us giving insight into what his mental state was not long before he went missing. I reiterate that he didn't seem to have any trouble getting from Georgia to Virginia. That went fine. But we also have to remember, on the other hand, for all of these people who are older, and you see that there's a silver alert, person in SUV is missing, and it says person did have dementia, probably shouldn't have been driving a car in the first place. Well, for all of them, you know what? They had a drive where everything was fine, and then the next trip they took wasn't fine. We have to remember that. So just because the last trip the person took was good and they got from point A to point B and then back to point A doesn't mean the next one is going to go like that. I also think it's important that this area was familiar to Robert. Did he park that vehicle there in planning to take a walk of some type and stumbled off into the bushes because he had a heart attack? I guess that's possible. I think that's important as well. I will tell you overall, this does not feel like a carjacking foul play type of situation. This does not look to me like a situation even where, he's at the convenience store, he comes back out, and then somebody jumps in the vehicle with him with a gun, threatening him, drive here, do this. It's very, very unlikely. In fact, as I've tried to point out in many disappearances that we've featured on the podcast, that we have to remember, when we see cars abandoned along the road on the highway, 99.999% of the time, the car is not there due to foul play. The car is there because a person broke down, a person ran out of gas, the car got stolen and somebody went for a joyride and that's where it ran out of gas and the person ran off. All of that is way more likely than a car being abandoned somewhere and it's foul play. And this is why it's always puzzling to me why so many people jump to foul play in these situations where overwhelmingly, statistically, it's probably not foul play. Brianna Maitland is a disappearance that comes to mind where people jump to the immediate conclusion that it was foul play, whereas people are abandoning cars all the time, and it's not foul play. In contrast to Paige Rinkowski, who surely got abducted after having some issue with another person on that highway up there. Was it Michigan, Indiana, up in that area like 30 years ago? That's something different. I just think that you're going to – I unfortunately think that Robert is deceased. My guess is that just felt like taking a walk and something happened. Very well could be memory, brain related. But actually at this point I'm leaning more toward just a physical issue. Just wanted to take a walk, parked his car there, knew the area, was going to take a walk, and something happened. And he just hasn't been found yet, which is very, very common. I anticipate he eventually will be found. I can't make a prediction on when that will be, though. So there you go. That is my analysis for the recent, quote-unquote recent, going back to November of 2024, recent disappearance of Robert Williams. I'm always willing to help if his family has listened to this. I'm certainly willing to talk to them, give them any more insight. Of course, I can be reached at unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. But I'm just using the available information that is public, and I'll try to keep tabs on this disappearance. If anything new pops up, I will let all of you know. Thank you for listening. Please give this video a thumbs up. Please subscribe to this channel. And I will talk to you again at the end of February.